Hello again. Welcome to another edition of Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony.
I'm Raymond Peterson.
And I'm their friend and guest, Alan Singer.
Dr. Alan Singer, educator historian, is with us again because his expertise on the history of the country and the history of our battle for freedom and first-class citizenship is excellent. And so he's a good go-to person. This is being brought to you by the good graces of Zoom, Manhattan Neighborhood Network, and EVT Educational Productions. We're doing a Wednesday taping before our Monday air. And actually, as we're sitting here trying to get this together, our Congress, the United States Senate, is going through some kind of voting exercise or preparing to vote, or probably are voting on the John Lewis Voting Rights, Right to Vote, and the Freedom to Vote Act, variations of protecting the right to vote in this country. And because it doesn't look like they have enough votes to pass that, they'll also be trying to bring up something about changing the Senate rules, primarily the quote filibuster. And bottom line is the right to vote is in danger, democracy in danger, but it shouldn't be, because that's one of the most sacrosanct things that the founding fathers were trying to protect when they set up the Constitution. So Alan, give us a history, if you would, on why is it we've got to actually going back to this well of protecting the right to vote, because theoretically, when the enslaved people were freed, they supposedly were granted citizenship, full citizenship, but they still have to be granted another amendment to be able to vote. Go ahead, give us that background.
I wish it were true that the founding fathers wanted to guarantee the right to vote, even to white men. It's just not true.
Just for white men, landed white men.
In Federalist number 10, James Madison makes it very clear that the Constitution is designed to prevent majority rule, because majority rule is seen as a threat to the elite, the wealthy and the slaveholders.
Right.
The Constitution leaves voting qualifications to each individual state. Even as the Constitution has been amended, instead of providing the right to vote, what the Constitution says is you cannot deny people the right to vote in 1870 because they're Black, in 1920 because they're women, in 1972 because they're 18 years old. But never is there a constitutional provision that says adults, citizens of the United States, have a guaranteed right to vote. That's not in the Constitution.
That's worth repeating. Constitution says you cannot deny persons the right to vote, but it still leaves the voting rules and regulations up to the individual states.
Right.
But if the individual states block persons from voting because of nefarious reasons, then the federal government can step in. That's what you said.
Now, under the 1965 Voting Rights Act, the federal government, the Justice Department, had a right to monitor and make sure that they were not denying people the right to vote because they were Black, because they were women. However, the Supreme Court threw that out. And now the Justice Department does not have the affirmative ability to intervene. They have to wait until the discriminatory laws are put into effect, and then people can sue to challenge them. The Republicans in charge of the Supreme Court have decimated the right to vote in the United States.
So, Ray, a little about what Alan just said. We're talking about the fact that that 65 law actually guaranteed us certain rights and provisions, by certain provisions about the states can't be denying folks rights. How did the Supreme Court rationalize gutting that bill?
Well, I can read you the Chief Justice's opinion on that.
John Roberts?
Yeah, John Roberts, which tells the whole story. Yeah, first of all, he said the vote was 5-4 to repeal Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act. And the quote from Roberts, based on decades-old data and eradicated practices, nearly 50 years later, things have changed dramatically. The tests and devices that block ballots across have been forbidden nationwide for over 40 years, yet the act has not eased restrictions or narrowed the scope of coverage formula along the way. Those extraordinary and unprecedented features were reauthorized as if nothing had changed.
And what does that mean? He was saying that
What
things have
does that
changed
mean?
so great that there were no problems, that people could vote without anybody getting in their way. So we can gut this.
On the face of it, that's what it sounds like to me.
Alan, as a historian, is that exactly what it turned out to be?
What the Supreme Court ruled by 5-4 is that the racism that had blocked voting up until 1965, 50 years later, was no longer a problem. So now the Supreme Court, American society doesn't see race. Everything is fair. So the Supreme Court threw out the oversight to make sure that people's voting rights were respected. And the minute they did that, you started getting state legislatures coming up with schemes to block voting.
Okay, so now, Bob, to get back to where we are today, we're talking about the fact that I've got a survey from the Brennan Center to pick up on what Alan said, that if I can call it, I can set you up perfectly. And basically what I came across was the latest report from the Brennan Center, which is a think tank that deals with constitutional matters, especially things like voting and stuff like that. The Brennan Center came up with the fact, and I'll quote from them, in 2021, the state, the wave of destructive, the headline on the piece, not be crazy about saying what I'm trying to say, is this year's tidal wave of restricted voting legislation will continue in 2022. And this was a December 2021 roundup of voting laws by the Brennan Center. And it starts in 2021, the state legislative push to restrict access to voting was not only aggressive, it was also successful. Between January 1st and December 7th, at least 19 states passed 34 laws restricting access to voting. More than 440 bills with provisions that restrict voting access have been introduced in 49 states in the 2021 legislative sessions. These numbers are extraordinary. State legislatures enacted far more restrictive voting laws in 2021 than in any year since the Brennan Center began tracking voting legislation in 2011. More than a third of all restrictive voting laws enacted since then were passed this year. That is in 2021. That's what they're referring to. And in a new trend, 2021, legislators introduced bills to allow partisan actors to interfere with election processes or even reject election results entirely. Unfortunately, the momentum around this legislation continues. So far, at least 13 bills restricting access to voting have been pre-filed for the 2022 legislative session in 4 states. In addition, at least 152 restrictive voting bills in 18 states will carry over from 2021. All based on the big lie. And that's the opening of the report that they just came out with. So
now, Eric.
Go ahead, Bob.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step on you, Eric.
No.
But the dangerous part of what you just said was the second part. Not only are the laws getting tighter in these states in terms of absentee ballots, when you can vote, who can vote when, and things like that. What they've also done is change the management of the voting boards, of the voting systems, so that even if you get to vote, even if you vote for even if a certain candidate or party wins, they've created the mechanism to throw those votes out by making them political instead of just civil service.
Right. Instead
employees.
of nonpartisan civil servants, they're
Right.
now
And-
putting in partisan hacks to run the local elections.
And that's truly the dangerous part, because imagine if that had been in effect for the Trump-Biden election. That would have allowed those states in question, Georgia, Arizona, Pennsylvania, to swing to Trump just by having a partisan board say, you know what, this county didn't do it right. We're just going to throw that. You know, it enables a lot of shenanigans, and that's the big problem there, Eric. Exactly what you said. And the Brennan Center, for people who don't know, that's a offshoot of the NYU School of Law. So we're not talking about folks who don't know what they're talking about. This is this is a dangerous moment in history for those who aren't awake and noticing. This is dangerous.
They're a center that specializes in criminal justice issues, the Brennan Center. And so when you get these crazy laws that are being passed to abrogate rights of people, whether it's in fair trials or in voting, they will come out and call them out, which is what they've been doing. So what we have right now, as I said earlier when we kicked off the show, is Democrats trying to pass national voting rights protection laws to try to circumvent what these states, primarily Republican control, I shouldn't say primarily, they all Republican controlled state legislatures that are passing these restrictive laws. I can say that without fear of being wrong, because that's exactly what the data has shown. And so the Democrats didn't really get control of the Senate because it was a 50-50 Senate. And so the people who kept saying, why can't they deliver, keep forgetting that they had a 50-50 Senate. And so they needed all 50 Democratic senators. And so you've got Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, who don't believe in protecting voting rights. They say they do, but because the other 50 Republican senators do not plan to support any of these voting safeguard bills, then that leaves the Democrats in a pickle of having to do this by themselves. And two of their members don't want to cooperate. So that means that they are stymied legislatively. But what is the Senate procedure, Bob or Alan, that's holding them up from getting these bills passed? Something or other about procedural rules in the Senate called the filibuster or whatever.
I'll let Alan have that. He's the local expert here.
Okay. Well, former President Obama called the filibuster a Jim Crow relic that should be eliminated when it is used to block voting reform. There have been more than 2,000 of these filibusters in the last 100 years, but half of them have been just in the last decade. And that's because Republicans have used the filibuster to prevent any form of legislation being passed.
Alan, I'm sorry, go ahead. I thought you were through.
Repeat that, Alan. I think that's a good point.
Finish.
Now, the filibuster means that 60 out of 40 senators can decide that they don't want to allow something to come to a vote.
That's the minority. That's the minority.
That's a minority can prevent a vote. And it's not even a minority, it's a tiny minority. Because just in the United States Senate, the 26 least populous states have 17% of the US population. You could have senators from these small Republican states can block laws that have overwhelming support about the public. Now, filibuster actually comes from the Dutch word, or it may be Spanish, for freebooter, and it's from the 1830s, the idea that these are people are really destroying democracy. Now, originally, to have a filibuster, you had to stand there and speak to block it. The longest filibuster speech was by Senator Strom Thurmond, 1957. He did it to block civil rights legislation, and he spoke for 24 hours. But since the 1970s, you don't even have to do that anymore. Senators can have what they call a silent filibuster. If a group of 41 senators says, we're going to have a filibuster, they can't bring something to a vote. So Republicans can now have a pretend filibuster and just say, you're not voting on this bill. That's what we face now.
Right. So,
And
so
could I toss in something, Eric?
go,
Because
go.
we were talking before we went on air today, and a number of people found a comment from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. from 1963 on the
Mhm.
filibuster. We don't have time to roll in the video right now, but let me just give you a quote to what Martin Luther King Jr. said. "I think the tragedy is that we have a Congress with a Senate that has a minority of misguided senators who will use the filibuster to keep the majority of people from even voting." And that's July 1963 that he said that. And just what you say, Alan, Republicans have been using this against Democrats for ages, and yet they come trying to smell good by asserting that the Democrats are doing something, that somehow they smell better at this point in trying to block this legislation. But go ahead, Eric.
Alan, you wrote a piece for one of the blog posts on King and his filibuster comments and his actual drive to bring the voting rights bill to fruition.
King, has some of the greatest speeches in the history of the United States. And as teachers, we use them in classroom all the time. Birmingham jail, March on Washington, his where do we go from here? But one of his forgotten speeches is actually from 1957. And the Southern Christian Leadership Conference organized a prayer pilgrimage to Washington at the foot of the Lincoln Memorial. And in this speech, Martin Luther King emphasizes, give us the ballot. And King makes the point that the reason Jim Crow has been able to keep hold in the South through all the racism is because Blacks have been blocked from voting. And what he says is, if we have the right to vote, if the federal government protects that, we can pass fair legislation. He was right in 1957, and that problem remains today.
Yeah, the John Lewis voting right to vote. They got two bills and I confused the names of both of them. One's called John Lewis right to vote. The other one's the Freedom to Vote Act. Both of those bills are trying to solve some of these problems that are being caused by these state legislatures passing these crazy anti-voting laws. And the fact that Mitch McConnell will stand in the Senate and call this a Democratic political power grab to try to take the voting powers away from the states, I find totally obnoxious. It's as bad, if not worse, than Sinema and all these other people coming up with their Martin Luther King tributes and getting lambasted on social media for being hypocritical, for trying to quote Dr. King, while they're standing there, even as we're speaking, blocking legislation that will allow the protection of that one key sacrosanct right that people have actually died to achieve in this country, the right to vote. So what's Chuck Schumer's plan B? Does he break these voting rights things down into smaller bills? Does he come, they can't get around Manchin. Oh, let me go one step further. Why are we just blaming Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema for this filibuster crazy blockade? You've got 50 Republican senators that are standing there saying, we're not voting for any of this legislation. We're not protecting your right to vote. We're not protecting all these people in these crazy states like Georgia, Texas, Wisconsin, wherever they're passing all these crazy anti-voting laws. Those Republicans are sitting on there. Where's Mitt Romney? Where's Susan Collins? Where is Lisa Murkowski? Where is anybody who thinks that this is the democracy that they're trying to protect, where these voting rights issues, where are they for his Joe Biden's infrastructure bill, his Build Back Better bill? These Republicans are sitting on their hands, passing no legislation, blocking every legislation because it's a divided Senate, and Manchin and Sinema are not cooperating with the rest of the Democrats.
Could I toss something in, Eric? I just happened to be looking at the feed from the Times. You know, they're doing the live updates of the voting. And I can see that Cory Booker, the Democrat from New Jersey, and Tim Scott, well, I should say the Black Republican from New Jersey, and
From
Tim Scott,
South Carolina.
I'm sorry, I got
Yeah.
it mixed up. The Cory Booker, the Black Democrat from New Jersey, Tim Scott, the Black Republican from
South Carolina.
South Carolina, apparently got mixed it up on the floor because apparently Scott didn't like the use of the word Jim Crow. And,
Tough.
yeah, I know.
It is what it is.
Yes, and so you know they're having it out right now. I looked up what Mitt Romney had to say about the Voting Rights Act, and he's just spouting the Republican standard slogans, trying to steal the votes away from the people, and this, that, and the other thing. You can count on Mitt Romney like once every 2 years to say something smart.
Yeah.
Today wasn't his day.
Right.
Look,
And
Eric quoted McConnell of Kentucky, the Senate Minority Leader, who said that the Democrats are trying to destroy states' rights. And it's a very important statement because states' rights was used to defend the right to have slavery. States' rights was used to defend the right to have Jim Crow segregation. So what we have is the Republican Party defending the most grotesque policy in the history of the United States.
Correct.
And every one of those 50 people who sit there quiet, plus the 2 Democrats, need to be condemned because they are undermining any pretext of democracy in this country.
Yep.
Shame on them.
Yep. Speaking of,
I'm sure Ray and I remember we weren't born then, but we remember the movie Birth of the Nation by D.W. Griffith. And there's multiple scenes in that movie, which honors the KKK throughout. And there's a particular scene where the blacks are in the legislature or whatever, and they're taking off their shoes. They're looking lazy. And then there's another part of the movie where the KKK blocks them from coming out the door to vote.
Yeah.
And that's like a highlight of the movie.
And there was a grand premiere in the White House for that movie.
Yes, Woodrow Wilson. First movie to be shown in the White House, by the way.
Was it the first movie?
First movie to be shown in the White House. Birth of a Nation.
First movie. That's a great statement to the
To
country.
be shown in the White House.
Yeah.
D.W. Griffith was Fox News before there was Fox News. Okay.
Part of the debate over critical race theory centers on Reconstruction, the period after the Civil War, because W.E.B. Du Bois writes a book in the 1930s arguing that the Reconstruction legislatures, primarily were Black, passed enormous amounts of important legislation, like creating the first public schools in the South.
Right.
And that their achievements were denied because of the racism of reinstituting white minority governments.
Correct.
And the Zinn Project, which has been pushing for teaching the truth, has now made a big commitment to teaching the truth about Reconstruction and how the overthrow of Reconstruction has been used to justify continuing racism in the United States.
Oh yeah, that was the actual time period when the country could have been reborn into its higher principles that it had written into the Declaration of Independence. And for, 8 to 10 years, Alan? That 1876 election when they went. So that 10 years between the end of the Civil War and Rutherford B. Hayes's backroom deal to assume the presidency is when the country lost its soul again and reverted back to, we're a white supremacist country. And
a very good
that's
way
what
of
we've been
putting it.
living with ever since, trying to fight. See, people forget this was never a democracy, as you told us early on, Alan. It was a republic designed for oligarch landed white men. But they put these fine principles on paper that everyone said, oh, these are great. Let's try to make that be the real deal. And we've been trying to make that be the real deal for 400 years. I don't know how much time we have left, but
We have about 2 minutes and 20 seconds.
well, within 2 minutes and 20 seconds, we know that they're not going to succeed, but we'll see what they do about still trying to protect the vote and coming back around. A quick update. A bunch of close Trump people were subpoenaed by the January 6th Commission, Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell, and a couple of other folks who were close to the planning for the coup. And so we're going to see what happened. The Oath Keeper Rhodes, he's arrested and in jail. They snatched him up. And so his I wasn't involved and they went off mission statement about his Oath Keeper troops didn't protect him this time. So we're going to see what happens. They look like they're getting closer to the war room at the Warwick, was it the Warwick Hotel? They are in the war room at the Warwick Hotel with the subpoenas on Giuliani. So it looks like the Justice Department is ramping up into a much more aggressive investigation of the January 6th attempted coup. With that as a tag, what do you say? Is there something else we should tag that we, or we'll just have to deal with it the next show?
Well, go ahead, Ray.
No, I was going to say I'm just going to bring up the critical race theory bill that Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has been pushing to quote, well, to not cause quote discomfort unquote in white people for what has happened in the past racially. That the bill against critical race theory doesn't want it taught in schools, doesn't want private businesses teaching it. And you know, when they're training their employees, and that got its first approval in the Florida State Educational Commission this week.
Yeah, okay. So with that,
I think Ron DeSantis in Florida.
Yeah, the ultimate Florida man. All right. So I guess we're about out of time. This has been Media Watch, folks. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony. Follow us on Twitter and YouTube at Media Watch EVT.
And I'm Raymond Peterson.
And Alan Singer, and teaching the truth about the past does not make me uncomfortable.
Right on.
We'll catch you the next time, folks. Be well, stay safe. This pandemic is still upon us.